Okay, thanks for the takeaways from last week, and I just want to start off the way we typically do. And one last thing, please put your name on the attendance sheet. If you do not sign, you are not here. So please sign, okay? So you don't get docked for not showing up. Okay, takeaways from last week. Anybody want to comment about last week's presentation? Last week's class? Anybody? Did anything that was said last week surprise anyone in terms of litigation, IP litigation? Yep.
I don't know if this is like the biggest takeaway, but something that really surprised me was that there's a stark difference between the courts of the U.S. versus how courts abroad approach like discovery.
That's right. That's right. A big difference. And I think that if, one takeaway is much of the U.S. system, okay, and not just IP enforcement, but the court system in general in the United States is rooted in what? What did I say last week? Well, it's due process, but a populist notion that is an intrinsic distrust of central government. That's really why we have a jury system, okay? And you're not going to see that in most any other country on the face of this earth. The extent, other countries have jury systems, but not so much in civil context, and certainly not to the extent that we do in civil context. All right? So that's one takeaway. We do not like leaving our legal fates in the hands of judges, okay, technocrats, experts, okay? And when I say we, if you just look back at the Founding Fathers and the way this Constitution was created, all right? We like to leave the power in the hands of the people. So that's one takeaway. And from an IP perspective, the other takeaway is it is expensive, okay? So when you go out there and start your businesses, okay, do your homework up front, okay? Remember, we talked about trademarks, do all of that stuff up front. Take care up front, okay? Spend a little bit up front to be smart about protecting your IP and being smart about not going down some roads where you're going to bump into someone else's IP. Because that upfront attention, that extra money and time that you expend on that, okay, can save you a whole lot down the road, right? Particularly when it comes to litigation, certainly defensive litigation. All right, any other thoughts about last week? Yep.
You can use the International Trade Commission as a different way to protect your intellectual property.
That's right. The ITC, the International Trade Commission. The International Trade Commission is what branch of the government?
Executive.
The executive branch. That's right. What can't you get out of the ITC that you can get in a court, in an Article III court? Anybody? Yep.
I don't think you can get the damages.
That's right. That's right. That's right. What you can get is basically an order to U.S. Customs to block, okay, the infringing product from coming into the country. Okay, if you want damages, you need to go file a suit in court, which is why with these ITC actions you often see parallel judicial proceedings. They're put on hold until the ITC proceeding moves forward. Okay. And by the way, we're going to see, I think, more and more cases going to the ITC because cases in the judiciary, the Article III courts, okay, tend to be so expensive, tend to be relatively uncertain, and they tend to go on a long, long time. Okay. I'm going to shift gears and introduce to you Jim Trussel from BP America. Jim is in charge of all of BP's IP worldwide.
Correct.
Okay? And before I hand this over to Jim, and he's going to give you a little bit of background about BP, all right, try to understand, I want you to understand what we are trying to accomplish today. I was telling Jim, in retrospect, he would have been perfect to have as our last guest speaker, okay? Because what Jim is going to do today, all right, is capture, all right, everything you've learned over this course. And what he's going to do is walk through the various ways in which you can extract value out of IP. Okay, we've all learned them from class to class, right? We've learned about licensing. We've learned about enforcement. Okay, we've learned about getting the IP to begin with. All right, we've learned about you have a decision. Do you patent? Do you keep it as a trade secret? All right, are you going to keep Are you going to keep your IP? Are you going to enforce your IP? Keep others out of your market? Or are you going to allow them to participate in the market and get the value out of your IP through a license? Okay, those are all options that we've covered over the course of our semester. And what Jim is going to do, okay, is he's going to take all of these concepts and he's going to piece them all together for you, all right, in the context of his work at BP. And in the context of some specific technology at BP. One of the reasons that I'm thrilled to have Jim with us today is he's just an excellent speaker. He's taught before. We're going to have a lot of fun today. Please participate. Jim and I both, we're going to flip it back to you. Try to get your ideas, engage you, get you thinking, okay, about how to make this IP work in the context of the business issues that Jim's going to present you. Push back, ask questions, okay? We're going to have a lot of fun today. So, with that, welcome Jim Trussel.
Thank you, Luke, for the nice introduction. Thanks for the invitation here. When Luke got in touch through a friend of a friend, whether I'd be interested, I jumped at the opportunity. Really excited to do this with you and maybe help bring this to life a little bit for you tonight. And if you need me back next week, I can arrange to be in Southern California from Chicago whenever you need me here. So you just let me know if next week turns out to be a good week too.
Except midsummer.
All right. Yeah, no, I don't need to be here in summer. I'll take advantage of our summer in Chicago. And thank you all for being here, particularly with Thanksgiving a couple of days away, and I'm sure many of you have family plans and travel plans, so good to be here. Luke said I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview of what BP is about, what our business is, what our technology is, really only as a way to set the stage for 4 case studies. We've teed up 4 case studies we're going to get a little bit later tonight on what is the right IP for a business model, how would you choose what it is, how would you exploit it, how would you further your business interests with it. But those will make a little bit more sense if we have the business context. Few things to just plant the seed now that I hope you understand is there are countless options for doing this, but it's really all in furtherance of succeeding in your business. And if you can't connect the dots from what you're doing with intellectual property to how that will help you succeed in a business, you really need to step back and rethink that. So we'll go through a little bit. I know you've talked about all of the components of intellectual property. We'll run through those a little bit. We'll talk about the pros and cons on any of the various types. We'll talk about how you might choose them, how you might put an intellectual property strategy together. But then again, most of the discussion will be, let's run through some examples and play with the different options. How might you do it? How has BP done it? And look at those models, those business models, and see what we can do to make sure the business succeeds. And I really want this to be useful to you. This is for you. This is for you to help piece this together. So please ask questions. Please challenge. If something doesn't make sense, let's spend some time on it. If it's interesting, you want to pursue it some more, please let's do this so that this is most useful for you. So let's get started. I'm going to fly through just a little bit of information, perhaps unless I turn something off.
No.
What have I done? Oh, there we go. Good, okay. I'm going to fly through a little bit of information about BP, previously called British Petroleum. We're a big oil major. We find oil, we get it out of the ground, we turn it into marketable products, and then we sell those products. That's it in a snapshot. It sounds like a century-old business model. It is, but it's a business model, as you see, that has cutting-edge technology, technology that supports a business model, and intellectual property that supports that business model. We're a global company. You've talked about the ITC, foreign litigation. We operate in over 70 countries around the world. I've got 74,000 employees, a fair number of those we'll talk about doing our R&D. This is a large company. We're pushing $200 billion in sales, so whatever you can do to further that business overall is great. Whatever you can do, there are many small businesses trying to emerge in BP's model in an entrepreneurial style. What can you do to bring these businesses and scale them up? Profits, barrels of oil. We take about 3.3 million barrels of oil a day, which is a fair amount. So this is a high volume process, and you'll see later in those volumes they're looking for efficiencies, technology to really do that well. Ton of retail sites. We're a customer-facing site. We don't have retail sites here on the West Coast. We operate through the Arco brand out here on the West Coast. That's a BP company. So we operate out here under the Arco brand, brand-facing. We run refineries. It's a broad and complex business. But to set the stage for some of the business cases we're going to talk about, we generally split our business into three pieces. One we call upstream. That's go find the oil, get it out of the ground, and bring it someplace where you can turn it into something. It's a profitable business. It's a long life cycle process from looking for the oil, finding it, drilling some wells, starting production, running the production. You could be a decade out before you're actually turning a profit on these. So you need to do it very well up front. We've got 7 new projects going in this year. We're globally active. We get long-term contracts with the asset holders around the world. And again, so that part, we'll talk a little bit more. Let's find the oil, let's get out of the ground, and let's bring it where we can do something. The next leg of our business we call our downstream. So now that you've got this crude oil, bring it to a refinery and turn it into something useful. It's a growth business. We run refineries. With a refinery, you're taking that crude oil, turning it into gasoline, jet fuel, diesel, petrochemical products, motor oils, taking the crude oil, turning it into something useful, and then bringing it out to the market. Whether that's selling it through our Arco stations, our BP retail stations, whether that's selling it through our Castrol motor oils, that's a big business for us. But we're looking at those things to get the products out into the market. The third thing we do is a lot of surprises. Of all of the oil majors, BP is the largest operator of alternative energy operations. We have a large biofuel operation in Brazil. We have some emerging biofuels operations in the US. We run a very large wind power business in the United States. So it's an aspect that we know we have to be ready for where the world is going, and we want to be a partner in where the world is going into a low carbon future. So again, we're one of the largest operators of the big companies of alternative energy. So within that context, how do you support those businesses? Yes, I'm sorry.
Yeah, on that last slide.
Yes.
I'm just curious, do you know what percentage of barrels of oil equivalent energy is produced from your wind energy?
It's small. So if you looked at anybody, I don't remember the number, but wind, solar, bio, those are all really single digit as % market penetration. Yeah. Good question. Anything else on that? Yes.
How profitable is that sector of your business compared to the other?
They're all profitable. The nice thing about having that portfolio of businesses, as in any portfolio, these things tend to ebb and flow. So for a while, oil prices just dropped miserably, and that was unprofitable for a while. It's bounced back. Luckily, when that happened, retail was looking good. If the oil was cheap, that business hurt, but if you're turning that oil into something to sell, that can be more profitable. The wind, right now, wind in the US relies on government credits, tax credits, to help make it profitable. It's not quite there. It needs a little bit more critical mass. Our biofuels business in Brazil, very profitable, standalone, comparable profits. It's interesting, as you look at any business is capital constrained. Anytime you're going to invest your next dollar or your next $100 million, somebody's going to be saying, let me drill another oil well. Somebody's going to say, let me build another refinery. And somebody's saying, let's buy some more wind turbines or solar panels or biofuels. So they all have to compete, and they all do compete. They're all in the same ballpark in being worthy of those kinds of investments. Good. Anything else on those businesses? Great. So to keep these going, and we'll learn as we get into the 4 case studies, technology is a major driver of our business, a major enabler of getting the centuries-old businesses to run better and getting the new emerging businesses to hit the ground running. So whether we're talking about getting oil out of the ground, which people have been doing for a century, technology critically important there, right on up to the biogenetic engineering to make the bugs that make your biofuels better, to emerge with a nascent business like that. Technology runs across the board. We've got 7 major technology centers. We've got about 2,000 researchers around the world. We're spending about $600 million a year on our R&D efforts. And as I'll talk about later, if you're spending that much money on your R&D, you have to take some reasonable steps to secure it and make sure it's profitable. You don't do this as a research institute just because you like research. You do it because you're trying to make some money with it. So we'll talk about how the business strategies, the technology strategies, and the IP to protect that all fits together. Now with that, just a little bit about our intellectual property department. We've got 50+ people around the world who do intellectual property at BP. We tend to be centered around the technology centers. We tend to try to stay close to the researchers, close to our internal clients. And it's a big operation. We rely heavily on outside law firms, whether it's writing some of the patents that you might talk about those processes, whether it's the litigation in the US, ITC, our foreign litigation. We partner very carefully, very closely rather, with our external partners. So that's a bit of a snapshot on the business and technology context that we're running on this. So I'm going to switch gears now and bring it to the next level. Let's talk a little bit about the technology, because I think it can be an eye-opener for folks on, you've been doing this for a century, what's left to wring out of this? But there's still more to do. I think when we look at the upstream business, again, this is go find the oil, get it out of the ground, bring it someplace. We have a couple of skill sets at BP that rely heavily on very, very complex technology. Seismic, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit. We're often operating in the Gulf of Mexico, in the North Sea, where you could have a mile-deep ocean. So we're out in water that's a mile deep, and then we're going to end up drilling a well 2 more miles below the seafloor. So you're up, in essence, 3 miles away from the oil that you need to find. It costs hundreds of millions, over $1 billion, to get a platform there and get the oil out of the ground. If you're going to commit those resources, you better get it right. So how do we know we're in the right spot? We do sonar. Sonar like a porpoise might use, the echolocation. Sonar like submarines in the war movies. We're blasting sonar signals through the ocean, under the ground. It reflects through all of the rocks. It bounces back up. We're towing sensors behind it to capture these signals, and then we're processing them on a computer. BP has the largest non-government, non-military supercomputer in the world to process these signals. I've been in this room. Star Trek Next Generation fans, or if we missed the generation? No? All right. Bear with me, please bear with me. There are scenes in Star Trek The Next Generation where they go into the holodeck. It's an imaginary environment created by the computer. We have a room at BP where you put on goggles, walk into this room, and you're walking through the well, through the reserves, around the salt dome, under the rocks, and really exploring where this oil is. Again, that's to make sure you can find that oil and get it out of the ground. Then we have to get it off the surface. Here you see some of these yellow nodes, these boxes along here. So if you've got the well that's in a mile deep water and then you're digging down, you're going to dig perhaps dozens of wells 2 miles down. And then you've got this large infrastructure on the floor of the ocean that gets this oil and then brings it up to the surface. The tentacles of this operation for a single operation can span the size of Houston. We always use Houston as an analogy. That's where we're located. So imagine something the size of Houston on the ocean floor where all these wells are coming through.
What is the size of Houston?
Well, when I drive through it, it seems infinitely big. It's got to be about 6 or 7 miles across, the scope of some of these operations that they've got going down.
I mean, it's what, close to 30, 40, 50 square miles?
Probably, yeah. Yep. So you'll have some main wells, you'll have the adjacent wells. When the wells get old, you'll actually have the well where the oil is coming out. You might go a half a mile away, dig a well, pump water in it, and that high pressure water is pushing the oil out to come out to the other side. So a lot of complexity. Again, been getting oil out of the ground for a century. There's still a lot of technology in here, and we'll talk about that on how to protect those things. So that's the quick flyby on what it takes to get oil out of the ground and bring it up to then hand it over to the next business, our downstream segment. These are running our refineries. We need technology here to stay safe, to stay reliable, and to push that next tiny incremental improvement in efficiency. If you can run from 94 to 95% efficient, if you can move your margins from 10% to 11%, you're really looking for that technology to try to push that through. In essence, you take the oil into the refinery, heat it, boil it, distill it, and out of a barrel of oil, you're going to turn that into some diesel fuel, some jet fuel. You'll turn it into gasoline, you'll turn it into kerosene, you'll turn it into motor oil. You're segmenting out that crude oil into those various components that come out of it in the refineries. We'll also do chemical conversions. We do petrochemicals that go into the bottles. Then we're looking at technologies. How can you make these more environmentally friendly? How can you reduce the carbon footprint? How can you make these recyclable? So we're looking at how to do better jobs with the petrochemicals that are coming out of these things. Gasoline improvement. If we can sell gas that gets you 1 more mile per gallon, 2 more miles per gallon, an impact on the carbon footprint and an impact on your wallet. If we can give you motor oils that keep your engines cleaner just a little bit longer, that can defer your next oil change maybe a couple of thousand more miles. Again, reducing carbon footprint, getting efficiencies in the autos. How can we create additives for the fuels? How can we create additives for the oils? So that all of these things just keep getting a little bit better in a way that maybe isn't really obvious to a lot of people, but how do we just keep moving these forward? So this is some of the stuff we'll be talking about as we get into the other business areas. So I'm going to switch the corner here, having laid here's what our business is about, here's why you might care about the technology, and we'll get back into, I hope, a refresher and hope bringing it all together on the various pieces of intellectual property, how you tie that in. Let's talk about that in general, make sure we've got a good grounding, and then we're going to go through. We've teed up 4 case studies. I want to hit the first 2 in a lot of detail. If we're done, we're done. If we've got a little bit more time, we can maybe do a light touch on the 3rd or 4th case study and brainstorm some ideas on what IP might be appropriate and how you support a business model. So we're going to switch over, a little bit more IP from the business. Any other questions or, yeah?
Yeah, just while we're on the topic of R&D. So,
Hey, Jack, keep your voice up.
oh, sorry. Just while we're on the topic of R&D, do you know what percent, or if any, VP invests in like renewable energy IP
Yeah.
R&D?
Absolutely. So one of our, these tend to ebb and flow, but for a while, our biofuels business for about 2 years was our highest patent filer. and these tend to be a bit cyclical. So we were kind of starting up from ground zero on some biofuels, key technology, the genetic engineerings and things like that, so we were filing very heavily in there. That's now a bit mature on that technology. Now we're more in commercial and exploitation, so not new patents these days, but keeping that portfolio and trying to seek that.
Any in like non-carbon renewables, like solar or wind?
So we tend to be more of an efficient operator in wind. We tend not to do the R&D in wind. We're buying the turbines, getting the land, plugging into the network. We're a bit more of a major project operator is our business strength there. We were a big filer in solar, photovoltaic solar for a while. Had trouble competing on that business. That's probably a topic for another class. But we found trouble maintaining a profitable position. And there, perhaps on point here, even with a strong patent position, we were being undercut on price. And so all the patents in the world aren't going to help you if people can get, similar performance for less money, perhaps through unfair trade practices on China's part, but we'll leave that for another day. But that one, we're not doing a lot of work in solar today. Yes? Okay.
No, go ahead, Thomas.
Has BP ever pursued any research in nuclear energy?
We've not. No, that's not one of our strengths. We try to hit our core strengths, and we don't play in nuclear. No.
Even if it's not like high pressure uranium, if it's thorium, it's renewable.
Again, those are all fantastic technologies and could be solutions for the future. We, as any business would look, as you're looking at where are you going to succeed, what skills do we bring to the table that are unique? We just don't have unique skills to bring to the table in the nuclear.
Because if it's, as you say, it's the source of the future, then these patents could be very valuable for your business.
They sure could, absolutely. And I think it's a resource question. That $600 million research budget, I'll bet those lab heads would tell you, I could use $1 billion, I could use $2 billion, but we're all capital constrained. With that investment to stay profitable, we have shareholders who want to make sure we're keeping a profit. There are just limits at where you go. That could be a very exciting field, just not one of BP's core strengths, and BP's not doing the research there now.
One of the things I want to underscore is as we work through these business issues, is that, BP is an enormous company, right? But the points that we're going to be making and working through, and the problems that we're going to be, the challenges that we're going to be working through, are challenges that we're going to meet in any business, any size, okay? And bear that in mind as we go through some of these examples.
Yeah, absolutely. Good reminder on that. And so, in fact, we'll switch over and start setting the stage for that discussion. I'm often asked, why would we do intellectual property at all? And I'm fighting for capital at my employer just like any of those lab heads or any of the marketing heads are fighting for capital. A thing that I'd like you to really take home is, why would you care about intellectual property if you were trying to pursue a business, whether startup or mature or anywhere in between? I think there are two key things. If I could distill this entire class and grossly oversimplify it, there should be two takeaways. You can use intellectual property to help stake out a position to grow your business. If you forgive the sports metaphor, you can play offense with intellectual property. You've got an asset, you're going to use it, you're going to use it to grow your market share, you're going to use it to keep people away, you're going to use it to make money. IP is an asset that allows you to play offense. So that's one thing that I think this class distills down to, and we'll talk about that. The second thing I would say is you want to avoid stepping unaware into somebody else's intellectual property. You want to avoid playing defense, is what I would say. We've learned last week about litigation and how expensive it is. You don't want to stumble into that. So if you're doing intellectual property well, you can avoid playing defense out there. Those are the two things. If you remember nothing else, I'd suggest those are really the core essentials of why you want to do this. And what I remind people, it is an investment. We talked about it as investment. You need to spend some money now, but you want to get it right later. If you're doing any kind of technical development, if you're doing any kind of R&D, if you're doing any investments to create something, and you're not protecting it, you're doing that R&D for your competitors. The fast followers will be there, right there behind you. So with our $600 million budget, or your $50,000 budget, or anything in between, if you don't protect that R&D, the fast followers will be right behind you, and they'll be really happy you were doing that. You might as well just give them their R&D budget and just hand it over to them and let them do it if you're not going to protect this. So that's what I would say is kind of the reason for being, the reason why you want to do IP. Go play offense, avoid playing defense, and don't do your R&D for somebody else. So,
Wait.
oh yes, sure.
So when you say offense, do you mean like trying to see if other people are infringing and then using your IP as a way to shut them down?
Perfect question. So playing offense, yes, it could be shutting people down. I'd say there's about 6 things you can do that are playing offense, and we'll talk about that. But it's anything in positive furtherance of your business, whether it's shutting down infringers, whether it's just keeping them away. You know, the best patents you'll never have to enforce because nobody goes there without ever filing a suit. That's playing offense. Or licensing it for revenue, or working with business partners. But anytime you're using it to grow your business, to pursue your business, to help your bottom line, I would broadly call that playing offense. Other questions on this? All right. We like to talk about getting an IP strategy, and we'll run through our 4 case studies and talk about what an effective IP strategy might be in any of those settings. But I'd suggest you ought to have an IP strategy. It might only be a paragraph or 2. It might be 10 pages of tremendous complexity and sophistication. But if you haven't thought through what I'm trying to do with IP, if you don't have the strategy, you won't have something to guide your decision making. Do we patent? Do we keep trade secret? Do we get some trademarks? Should I get some copyright protection here? If you haven't thought through what's my framework, you're going to be making it up as you go along. So it's really good to try to articulate some kind of a strategy. You might find yourself changing that strategy fairly rapidly, you know, particularly if you're going from startup to mature. You know, what got you from A to B may be not what gets you to B to C. But think about it, articulate it, put the pieces together. We'll talk about a few of the building blocks that get into an IP strategy and how to do that. The thing I'd like to emphasize here is you'll probably have a business strategy. I'm sure anybody going through business studies, entrepreneurial studies, you're talking about, how do I write my business case? I've got a business case. I've got a business strategy. If technology is at all relevant to what you're doing, you've got a technology strategy. And I would suggest if you're doing business strategy and technology strategy, you need to have an intellectual property strategy. But no one of those 3 things stand alone. Those all are very iterative. Each one informs the other. Each one is informed by the other. So your technology strategy better support your business strategy. Your business strategy needs to make sense with your technology strategy. Your intellectual property has to support your technology. It has to support your business. These all iterate. I'd say there's 3 pieces to those things. And if you can articulate what you think your business strategy is, you ought to be able to articulate how your technology strategy would fit in. If you're a technology company, maybe it's just a brand strategy. But with your technology, brand strategy, business strategy, IP strategy, these all build on each other. And these are all an important component that comes together. People often say, I need help writing my IP strategy. Well, you can ask a number of questions. There are a number of pieces that need to go in there. But your IP strategy is going to be very, very context specific in any kind of a setting. So we talked about playing offense. We talked about playing defense. What have I done? There we go. Okay. I would say you can probably distill most of what you want to do with IP into this short list here. So we had a question here on exclusion, on blocking, on litigation to keep people out. If you can protect your intellectual property, if you can protect your R&D, if you can protect your technology, keep people out. You want to keep people away from what you're doing. Whatever your value add is, whatever you think your distinction is, you want to keep people away from there. And I think that's maybe a traditional thing people think about with intellectual property. How do I keep people out of my space? The exclusion, the blocking. There's this freedom to operate. We talked about, I'd rather not play defense. So if I'm understanding what my competitive landscape is, if I know what my competitive patents look like, if I know what my brand strategies are out there and how not to bump into somebody else's brand strategy, You want to make sure you've got a free path to bring your markets to bear, to bring your services to bear, to bring your technology to bear. Leverage trading assets, we're going to talk about this. There may be times where you need suppliers, where you need distribution partners, where you need regional or global partners. If you show up hat in hand to a potential business partner, you don't bring a lot of leverage to the table. You don't have a lot of power in that. You might be really at their mercy. If you can bring a strong intellectual property position to that, you might find yourself in a much better negotiation with your partners, your suppliers, your distributors, your foreign partners, whatever it may be. Revenue generation, that's the licensing model. Maybe you're not the right company to deploy this technology. Maybe you're not a good manufacturer. Maybe you're not a good distributor. Maybe you don't have the regional scope, but you've got a real valuable idea that others can bring to market better than you. So that's the kind of a licensing model that you might want to bring to bear in an opportunity like that. Reputation. Does Wall Street Journal still put that little, they used to have a little information box where they would score companies on their patent portfolio. If you can get some reputational pull out of what you're doing. IBM will report every year how many thousands of patents they filed, and their competition with the Samsungs of the world or the Sonys of the world on who's filing the most patents. You might not see a direct connection to bragging rights or reputation, but if you're perceived as a technology company, you just might find that helping out as you get into markets. And we find some reputational pull at our business.
And how so, Jim?
If you needed to go to, let's talk about the upstream model. You need to get on somebody's land to get the oil out of it. Maybe you can buy the land. Maybe you can lease it from the US government in the Gulf of Mexico. Maybe you can convince the government of Oman to let you work their assets. But you're going to be up there with Shell, and you're going to be up there with Exxon, and you're going to be there with Statoil, and any number of companies saying, you really ought to let us work this land for you. And what do you bring to the table to distinguish yourself from the others? Well, look at all these patents I've got. I've got these great patents on seismic technology. I'm going to find the oil better. I've got these great patents on the extraction technology. I'm going to get out of there. Look at my patent list. I bring a lot of technology to bear that these guys can't bring to bear. So there's where your reputational pull might help you get into some place that you wouldn't have gotten in elsewhere. And as a performance measure, often if you're looking at, did our R&D support a business? Did our IP support R&D to support a business? You might be looking at your patents to check out as a kind of a double check or a reality check on is your R&D working well? If you find yourself filing a lot of patents and then a couple of years later you're abandoning them all, well, where you're heading in the wrong direction with the patents, where you're heading in the wrong direction with your R&D. So if you're tracking what you're doing with your intellectual property, you might find that as a useful metric to help you gauge how you're succeeding out there. So,
Jim, if I could just interject,
yeah.
What's interesting with this list, and when I saw Jim put this list together, is that BP is fundamentally different than, say, Intel, right, or Nike, or Dolby, right, or Medtronic, right. And you've heard from representatives from all of these companies. And isn't it interesting how you hear the same concepts come up over and over and over again? So what you have is you have these same fundamental IP value, extracting value out of IP, those concepts, okay? And they hold true. They really are agnostic, if you will, to any specific industry or market segment. Does that make sense? And it's sort of an important takeaway here. I mean, what Jim's telling you about BP, okay, for example, if we talk about using IP to enhance reputation, we've heard that before. Using IP as a performance measure. We've heard that before. We heard that from Ben Ostapuk when he was here from Intel. Okay? Generating income from licensing IP. I mean, BP does that. But you've heard others talk about it. I mean, you had Jim Malenkowski come in, right? And you've heard others talk about this. So, I can't underscore this enough. These are just fundamental concepts that apply across the board. Keep that in mind. Okay.
Excellent. Yeah, I'd be shocked if I had come in here from any number of 24 different industries. I'd have been shocked if you saw a different list. Maybe different priorities, maybe different flavor.
Yeah,
But-
and they
but
didn't
this is the
compare.
list.
And they didn't compare notes. It's not as if Jim asked me to send him all the other PowerPoints. I mean, he just came up with this independently. So you all are getting to see the real stuff. I mean, this is coming from people who are practicing this stuff out there, and they're coming up with the same concepts. So I think it's a pretty powerful point.
Good. That's an excellent point.
Well, not
Thanks.
because I made it, but all right.
All right. I'm going to go through this quickly because I'm sure you've hit this, but it's just a nice reminder before we get into our little case studies. Real basic. If you're going to protect your technology, you're probably looking at patents or trade secrets. Our approach, and I would say is one that you want to check to best on industry, presumption in favor of a patent, and then talk yourself into trade secret, and we'll talk about why that is. But as you've learned, if your technology gets out there before you've patented it, you've lost your optionality. So we presume patent, but then talk ourselves into trade secret if that's the right thing. Brand protection, I'm sure you talked a little bit about common law rights, that if you're using it, you might get state-by-state rights, but the power of a registered trademark federally, again, would have a presumption in favor of a registered trademark. You might change that in context. I'm going to set aside copyright now. Copyright, if you're a big software company, you're relying on copyright. If you're in the entertainment business, movies, video games, books, music, you're going to be relying heavily on copyright. I'm going to set that aside a bit, but those are important too. They just don't fit the case studies that we'll be talking about as much. And in many regards, copyright can take care of itself. It'll attach automatically, as you've learned. There are advantages to registering it if you need to go enforce, but it's hard to misstep early on copyright. So we'll not, doesn't fit in our case studies, but happy to take questions later if you wanted to talk about that. Again, none of that should be news to you, nor should none of this be news to you, but it starts setting up our case studies. If your innovation can be reverse engineered, or if your innovation is very obvious from what you put on the market, you're not going to be able to keep a trade secret. You're going to need to patent that if you wanted to keep that in. And have a heavy dose of humility. Oh, nobody's going to figure out how we make this? They're as smart as you are. They're going to figure this out. It's often dangerous to try to rely on a trade secret if you think your competition isn't going to get where you got. Can you detect infringement? If you picked up a competing product, can you tell that they're using your technology? That would say we ought to go file a patent in this area. What are your competitors like? I know that if I get a good patent out there, Exxon's going to stay out of my turf. Shell's going to stay out of my turf, just like they know I will. So if you're in an area where you believe your competition is fairly reputable and they don't want to play defense like you don't want to play defense, that's going to favor getting some patents. You'll have the inhibition factor coming out of those things. Yes?
I was going to ask you real quick. So when past lectures we've seen that patents can get challenged almost like 50% of the time, how often would you say your patents get challenged?
We tend not to be in litigation very often. The majors, in many industries, you'll see players have found a way to stay out of each other's yard. In other areas, there's, bet the company litigation day by day. Oil industry, we tend to honor each other's patents, kind of stay out of the big fight, and license where necessary. So we fortunately don't spend the big money you heard about last week on patent litigation as often. As much as I like writing huge checks to law firms, we just manage not to do a lot of that. You just flip this around. When would you do a trade secret? If it's hard to tell if somebody's using your technology, if you really can keep it a secret, if your technology is not apparent from what it is you're putting out on the market. Processes often lend themselves to trade secrets. those are the areas where you think the trade secret might help you out. But it's an early decision. It's one you need to get right. So based on this foundation, I'm going to set up these 4 business cases that are real. We're going to run through these and really do a deep dive on the first 2 and then see where we go. But I'm going to just set these up for you and then we'll get started on them. We're going to talk about that seismic technology. Oh, was there a question?
Yeah, but
Yes.
it isn't exactly on this, but it relates to patents.
Yes.
Can a patent be denied or subject to litigation if it is directly impacted on the environment or disrupts the environmental reasons in it?
That is, no. So environmental impact as a way to refute a patent, no. No. So the patent system in the U.S., at least, as you've talked about, is it useful? Is it new? Is it non-obvious? Then that's it. The U.S. system, most national systems, don't start making policy decisions on would favor a patent here, but we disfavor it here. New and useful, you get it. Now, there are some limitations. In some countries, the ability to patent a pharmaceutical could be limited. Medical procedures, sometimes countries have made a value judgment to not let those go there. U.S., I'm not aware of anywhere they would say environmental would be a policy reason not to let somebody get a patent. Good question. Okay. And we'd have heard about it if there was, so that's a good question. Okay, so we're going to run through those 4 case studies. We're going to talk about our seismic business, talk about the technology a little bit deeper, and then I really want to get into some brainstorming with you. If that was you, how would you protect that business? And then how would you use that intellectual property to support that business? We'll talk about one I think is an interesting one, our biofuels business. Similarly, I'll give you a little bit more detail on how we do biofuels, where our strengths are, and let's then get into some brainstorming. How would you protect it? How would you try to exploit a business like that? I think those 2 case studies really let us run most of the options we've been talking about. I think that'll let us use up the full menu of opportunities for us. If we get through those and we have a little bit of time, we'll talk about our motor oil business, our Castrol business. I think that brings another facet in that might be interesting if we have some time. And then again, our petrochemicals, the plastics business. Might be a couple of nuances there that we could flesh out with our petrochemicals business if we don't get to that in the first 2 business models.
Why don't we take a 3-minute break? So here's the idea, right? What Jim is going to do is he's going to set up a business model, okay? And we're all going to work with Jim to come up with sort of the ideal, ideal may be the wrong word, but just, figure out different ways to deal with the various IP challenges that the problem brings to bear. So, with that.
Excellent. So let's jump back into our seismic technology. Again, very first thing, before you can start drilling, before you can start producing, before you can sell anything, you have to find the oil. You have to find it with a high degree of confidence. You have to know that the oil reservoir you think you found is large enough and material enough to invest perhaps $1 billion to set up a rig to go after it. So you really want this to work out well. If you looked at our $600 million R&D budget, a lot of that is going into this area. It's also a skill that BP thinks it's got an edge over the competition. We think we do this better than some others. We think this is one of the things that helps us distinguish ourselves to keep a good business model. And I said earlier, as you're trying to convince various countries to let you access their resources, it's something that we think we bring to the table as a way to distinguish ourselves. So we're going to run through a little bit of detail on how we do this, what we bring to bear, and then I'd really start brainstorming. In each of these components of this, what are the things we might do to protect it, and then talk a little bit about, with this protection, with this business, with this technology, how do you think we might go exploit this and run a profitable business? So to start out with seismic, one of the things you need to do is create the boom. There are sonic emitters that put a sound out there. The sound's going to travel. Maybe you're doing this on the land in the deserts of Oman. Maybe you're doing this out over the ocean. But you're going to be sending the signals down. You're going to be using some hardware that creates the boom. And the boom goes down there, creates the echoes, come back. What do you do next? Well, that's all hardware. Then you've got to receive these signals. So whether you're out in the ocean as you're making your booms, you have a big array of hardware you're towing behind a boat that will let you receive these signals. Or if you're on a land-based operation, you might put a bunch of nodes out in the field at certain locations so that the sound comes up, you've got to receive these echoes. You've got to receive the sound waves, their characteristics, the timing of them all, and you've got to bring that all into these receptors and gather this data. Then what do you do with this signal analysis? You've got terabytes and whatever the next prefix is that's bigger than terabytes. You've got massive amounts of digital data coming up from these fields. And you need to get that data to, as I said, we've got largest supercomputer, non-military, non-government use, and you're going to process that data. So software techniques, data processes, the analytics of the digital data into something you can use, projecting that into a tool you can use, whether that's our holodeck where you walk in with the figures and you're looking through the reservoirs, but you're going to take massive amounts of data, bring your expertise in programming and data analytics, and try to convert this data into useful information so you can make decisions. Where is the oil? How much of it is there? What do we think it would take to get this oil out of the ground? Is it worth investing here? And if we do invest here, how are we going to do this? What are some of the things you work with on these? Driving a truck around the desert, making big booms, is not a real sophisticated operation. Running a boat over miles of ocean, creating the booms, not a big value add operation. We typically work with service providers to do that. We will hire companies that do that work. The other things we talk about, you'll see that when I talk about what do, we find oil, we get it out of the ground, we bring it to a refinery, we turn it into something. We don't make a lot of widgets, if you will. So these sonic boomers or the nodes that have to receive them, building things isn't one of our key strengths. Building these sensors, building these sound things. So we're going to be talking with hardware manufacturers, and we've talked about, here I'm going to call them the business partners. How do you convince somebody that, whether it's Oman or Russia or the US and the Gulf of Mexico, how do you convince them you're the right party to go in there and help them do this? And they want to make sure you do this well. They're going to get a cut of every barrel of oil you take out of their resources. They're going to want to make sure you get more barrels of oil more quickly than anybody else. So they really want to make sure you're good at what you're coming there to do with their precious natural resources. What do we do well? We think we find this well. We think we obtain it well. We think we sell it high margin crude oil. So let's go through the various pieces here. And this is it. You're the entrepreneur. Here's the business model you've got. You've got a technology model. Now we're going to create our IP model. Let's go through this. Sound sources, hardware, thoughts on intellectual property opportunities on the boomers, the things that are making the noise.
Or license some other companies?
License them, okay, right. License them in to bring their technology to you, or license them to use your technology.
License them in.
Okay, so
Because we don't make that.
okay.
And just is it just jargon here? Have you been introduced to the language inbound and outbound licensing? Okay, and Natalie says no. Robert says no. What you've just described is Jack, is basically inbound licensing. Okay, so you're paying for technology that is outside and bringing it inside. It's inbound. Outbound is the flip side of that.
Right. Good thoughts. Other thoughts on the sound sources? Other ways you might look at that technology in the business? What do you think?
Robert?
Are
Jim,
you going somewhere else? I'm sorry.
One sec. Robert?
Verify that
Yeah.
information real quick. So inbound licensing is when someone else makes a product and you pay to keep that, to use the product, or that you pay to keep other people using the product?
Inbound is someone has technology outside of your company, and you are paying for rights to that, to bring that technology inside, inbound,
Okay.
right?
So do you need IP if you're hiring other people to go do this booming?
Good question. So if I just want you to bring your boomer and your truck and drive it, I'm just going to write you a check and ask you to do it. You're going to keep your own technology. You're going to be using the technology yourself. I don't need to drive your truck. I don't need to make the truck. I don't need to make the sound sources. Yeah.
But then how would you make the claim that we're the only company that can use this technology?
Excellent. So we're going to start talking in a bit about exploitation. If making the sound, to use an analogy, is kind of commodity work.
Excuse me.
If there's any number of providers and all we're making the boom on that aspect of this thing, does this sound like an area fruitful to protect IP? Is that one slice, so it's a several step process. What do you think about that step in the process? Is that one where you can distinguish yourself, or do you think you're going to distinguish yourself elsewhere?
Probably say elsewhere.
Probably distinguish it elsewhere, right? So maybe the sound sources is commodity, and not distinguishing yourself. You will quickly learn why I've never been asked to teach second graders how to write legibly. So my apologies up front. So let's talk about the next slice here. We've made the sound, it bounced through. Now what I really need is a large array of microphones, if you will, that are going to pick up this source, the sound reflections, the models back. If I'm out on dry land, I'm going to put a bunch of sensors out there and then integrate the data back. If I'm at sea, I'm going to tow an array of sonar receptors to receive the sound back. What do you think about that part of the puzzle?
So this could be completely wrong, but just an
That's
idea.
there's no wrong ideas when we're brainstorming.
Would it be possible to outbound licensing part of a signal receptor? So like just part of the hardware, but not
Yes.
all of it?
So talk a little bit more about what you think that might look like.
Well, if we're talking about if something's a commodity versus
Mhm.
distinguishable, and I imagine that the industry is very competitive, wouldn't it be beneficial for you to have a license that gives you greater financial success, but not doesn't take away from your competitive advantage in having that hardware?
So selectively licensing key aspects of it. Right, you absolutely can do that. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. So let's say with regard to the sound sources, the receptors, or more in general, let's talk about the receptors. Perhaps there's a big part of the receptor that's just got to be a sturdy box, it's going to sit in the desert, or it's got to be waterproof, and a lot of that is just commodity. But there's some part about the signal that I think if I use a receptor this certain way, I think I'm going to get a better sound signal than somebody else. So could we selectively license that out?
Why would you selectively license it out as opposed to keeping it for yourself and blocking others from using it if it gives you an advantage?
So let's talk about the flavors there. Couple of ways to do this, and this is a key model. I think this is a good discussion for us. If there are key aspects to this where let's say I don't want to make these microphones. I'm not a good manufacturer. There are commodity style microphones out there, but I've brought something good to bear. So I can go to a manufacturer and say, listen, I'm going to bring you some key technology. There are 2 or 3 ways I might want to try to exploit this for myself. I'm going to license you this aspect, but the microphones you make with this, you can't use for anybody else. This one's just solely for me. Another way might be, I'm going to license this key technology to you. This is going to make you more valuable than your competitors. I want a % of this when you do this for other people. I want a % back. So perhaps I'm willing to let you use it with my competitors, but I want financial gain. Or perhaps we talk about leveraging the relationship. I'm going to let you have access to my key technology. But perhaps it means when you do work for me, I get it at a discount to anybody else. So whatever your list price is, I want that 10% off because I brought you this key technology. So my competitors get access to the technology, but they're paying more for it. So that might help my business model. Or a head start. I'm going to give you a key technology, another way to do this selective licensing. I'm going to give you a key piece of my technology, you build it into your sensors, your microphones. But you know what? For 6 months, you can't use it for anybody else. Or for a year, you can't use it for anybody else. And then it can be used elsewhere. Or in this region, or for this area. But you can see how you might want to say, what's in it for me? So I think here this brings in a lot of the aspects. Key business partner, I'm bringing something to the table. I now have some negotiating leverage. This time the leverage is I have technology that could be beneficial to them. So we'll talk through. I'm going to give you my technology, you use it only for me. I'm going to use my technology, but you pay me for it. So I get a cut when you do it for anybody else, or I get discounts. So the selective has a lot of flavors how you might do that, and that's a very good way to try to bring your technology to bear. If you can't exploit it yourself, you need to bring somebody else in. So flip it around. If you were the microphone maker of those options, which sound good to you as a provider there? Because it's one thing for me to try to impose these limitations, but it's a negotiation. So if I were to say, all right, good question, I'm going to come back to you, but we'll take it from anybody. Sure, I'll give you this technology, but you can't use it for anybody else. How's that sound to you?
Well, it depends on what you're giving me in financial benefit. But
Right.
wouldn't it be best for me to say, well, if I'm the only one giving the making the microphone, don't I have a monopoly on that?
There are a dozen people making microphones out there. They're all pretty good. The prices are pretty similar. So you're out there competing with other people who do what you do. So I brought you my key technology. I think I can make you better than your competitors. Do you want to do it only for me? Do you want to pay me a cut of when you work for others? Do you want to give me a discount? What would you give me to have access to my key technology that your competitors can't get?
Maybe a discount.
Maybe a discount to me?
Sure.
Yeah. Other thoughts if you were the microphone maker? Yeah.
I'd be interested in how steady of a customer you're going to be.
Mm-hmm. So you want some guaranteed volumes from me before you would commit to doing specifics to me, right? Yep. Other thoughts? And I'll say, I'm not playing high, those all work. Those are all excellent business models, and we've done any number of those things. There are times when we're a high volume user of a service and we're going to let somebody have our key technology, and we've done all of these things. I'll commit to doing this with you for the next 3 years, but I want your best list price minus 10%. Or I'm going to let you do this, but every time you do it to somebody else, I want 5% of what your action is there. Sometimes we want the revenue. Sometimes we just want a discount. Sometimes we think this is really good. I want to be, if you're in a market where speed is important, maybe what you say is, listen, I'm going to give you my technology. You can only use it with me for a year. Then you can use it everywhere else. And maybe I've gotten far enough along where that year is a good head start for me. So those are all great ways to do selective licensing. You need a business partner. You need them to bring their strength, but you found a way to enhance what they do. A lot of ways to leverage that out. Those are all good options. Signal analysis. So now I'm going to bring terabits of data back to Houston, put them in my supercomputer, crank data, and have my engineers walk around in the holodeck so they know where to drill and if it's worth it. What do you think about protecting those processes and your analytical techniques? What IP tools might you think about on those? Right. So after I got my discounted microphones and terabytes of data in, now I've got the data, I'm going to analyze this data, and I'm going to make decisions about where to drill. And I'm doing this all on my supercomputer on my campus with my engineers. So what might you think about protecting the analytical techniques, your software, your expertise?
Yeah, I think for the processes-oriented things, definitely trade secrets, because like we were talking about before, it would be difficult to prove if someone else used that same process.
exactly. If I filed a patent and a less scrupulous company was looking at all of my algorithms and they're running those algorithms, never know about it. So software is a good spot to start looking at trade secrets. Other thoughts on that aspect? Good. That's an easy one. Let's not dwell on it. We do try to keep all of that stuff trade secret. Absolutely. Yes.
A more general question. Now that the world is moving more towards big data and using data as a tool for creating value, do you think that IP will need to change to address data as a discrete entity?
I do. Data as an entity as we go to big data. And we're working with some big service providers. You may have talked about this. I think you'll find as well-intentioned and with as much foresight as our Congress may bring to a problem, by the time they've issued those statutes, it's almost obsolete. And I think today that rate of change is going faster than it ever had been before. So if you went back 10 or 15 years ago, did patent law 10 or 15 years ago anticipate much of our biotechnology, genetic engineering? It didn't anticipate it, and you were trying to morph some simple laws into complex situations. Does our law today really sufficiently anticipate the world of big data we're getting into? I don't think it does. You know, it's easy to talk about, is it new, is it useful? But our courts are struggling in the digital world to apply our patents. They're struggling with algorithms. You know, algorithms may become some of the most important business assets we have, whether it's Uber telling them how many drivers do you need out there and when do we kick in premium pricing to algorithms like this. So I think our laws are behind the curve, and I think the courts are struggling. And I think it's I think there are really complex policy questions.
And what's a manifestation of that struggle that Jim just spoke about in terms of the judicial struggle?
Software cases like the Ellis case?
Exactly. That's exactly right. They're taking laws that really hadn't anticipated that setting, and in many cases, judges who struggle with the technology, and in many cases, bad facts make bad law. Sometimes this isn't the right place to decide this, but we're going to have to decide it here. So I think there's going to be a lot of challenges in how do you use IP to protect a world relying on big data and analytics. Absolutely. Good. Let's see. Business partners. I'm building this IP portfolio together. What's my relationship to Russia, Oman, people who have the resources and are deciding how to get in there? And I think here we're talking not as much about how to protect my IP, but there are some aspects of it. But really, how do you bundle this up and make a pitch to somebody? So if you came with this business partner to Russia, and the person in front of you was Exxon making their pitch, and the person behind you was Shell, what do you think your pitch is on what you have to bring to the table here? Yep.
I think there could be two things that would entice them to pick you in that bid. One would be potentially the revenue that you could be generating for them, and then the other would be how much more efficient you are in your process, and that could mean a couple of different things. How safe it is, or how environmentally safe it is, or your success rate, et cetera.
Yes, on all fronts. Absolutely, that's how you make that pitch. And now you bring it to what the oil minister of that company says, that's all great, we love your technology, come on in, but you know what? You don't get access unless you show us how you run your algorithms. You don't get access until you tell me what you did with the microphone makers and how I can use that. What if they try to exploit your value add out of them? Is this still an attractive place to come in and try to do business if you have to start sharing your value add? And perhaps next time you walk in, they're offering Exxon and Shell what you brought to them last time. Yeah.
Potentially you can make them sign an NDA for a couple of years or something so that you can have your competitive edge for at least that time period.
NDAs with your business partners, absolutely. Other thoughts? You know, what we're teeing up here is, I think, one of the most difficult questions an executive can ever make, and we do face these discussions all the time. Oman says, you want to come in here, You've got access to 5 years worth of oil. You're going to make X dollars a barrel. I'm going to take a cut of that. But you know what? At the end of the 5 years, you've got to make me as good at this as you are today. And some people might say, let's get in. I need 5 years of revenue. And some people say, yeah, but at 5 years in a day, I'm just another company. I have no distinguishing value anymore. Maybe over the next 5 years, I can leapfrog myself. But I think it's a tough question, and that's one where you get back to your business strategy and your technology strategy and your intellectual property strategy. You could tee that case study up with any number of executives in the real world, and you're going to get answers all over the board on whether that's attractive. What's your near-term business needs? Are you really revenue dry for the next few years and desperate enough, I need 5 years of revenue? You feeling good about the next 5 years, but you're thinking, 6 years out, I'm not sure if I'm relevant anymore. Maybe this isn't attractive to you if you have to start sharing technology. So that's a tough one, and it's one that you ought to, bring to bear. If you're starting to launch a product and you've got to start working with suppliers, competitors, business partners, and part of their access, maybe it's easy like the microphones. I'll give you my technology, but I get a discount. If that works, congratulations. If it's, I'll build it in, but I want to sell these to everybody right now, and I'm not going to give you a break. And you know what? I know you can't make microphones. So good luck if you don't want to do business with me. What are you going to do in that setting? And again, very, very, very context specific, but if you got to go to business, technology, and IP strategy, you'll be ready for those tough discussions. And there's no right answer on those. Those are the things that business leaders struggle with all the time, depending on what your business context is. Let's see. We should talk a little bit about brand opportunities. And I know you've talked about brands and trademarks and when would you register and how do you develop brand loyalty and things like that. Brand opportunities here, what do you think? And whenever I think brand, the first thing I think of is, well, if brands are about brand loyalty and keeping customers, who are the customers here? Who might be drawn to me in some way of a brand loyalty model under trademarks? You think this is fertile ground for trying to build a brand structure?
Who thinks it is?
Do you think, given the businesses you're dealing with, and thinking about if brands are building brand loyalty with my customer base, is this an area you might want to try to pursue a brand strategy and try to leverage your business?
Yes.
In what way? Who would you try to entice by building a brand strategy here?
I mean, it depends, but I think the primary focus for BP in terms of retail channels would be the customers, the everyday users, especially after the scandal that you guys have had.
Scandal?
Yeah. I think there's a lot that can be done for educating the consumer about what it is you guys do besides that one or those couple of mistakes.
Absolutely.
So that would be a branding opportunity where you could kind of begin trademarking different aspects of your business, as well as marketing materials that you can use. So I guess that would come in the form of copyright.
Excellent. So I think there are branding opportunities with the consuming public. But then brought here, does the consuming public show up in this business model we've talked about?
No. So I think in terms of this, so it's like B2B, I would say, there is branding in terms of technology. You can say that certain things that BP does better than their competitors. So you could therefore trademark the names of those processes. It's almost similar in terms of like how you would approach customers.
Exactly.
You want to have a brand that's strong so that people pick you.
Right.
In relation to that, does IP come into play when there's a big scandal?
It does. Hold that thought. I'd be happy to come back to that because there's a really interesting question there. Let's just tie this one up and come back to that. Yes?
Do you have IP about how to clean?
We do, and we give it away for free. Yes. Yes. We feel there is no business upside to preventing others from getting to access to clean something up. So we did actually build a consortium, brought in all our relevant IP, and if any were to come and say, can we license this? Yours for free. We'd like your improvements back so we all benefit from it. But
This is which
absolutely,
technology?
Cleanup technology
Cleanup.
after a response, yes.
You know, on the branding issue, it's an interesting question, right? I mean, let's take a step back and let's go back to fundamentals. What's the idea behind a brand?
The source of origin.
You're identifying it's an identifier of source of origin. Yep.
It tells you about the quality of what you're receiving.
Yes.
and not receiving.
Yes. Source of origin. It tells you about the quality. So think about a brand as almost an information shortcut. You see the brand, you make assumptions. Remember early on in this course when we said you're driving in the middle of nowhere land and you see Joe's Burger, I think that was the example I used, and then you see McDonald's and you need to pick a place to eat. Where are you going to go? You're going to go to McDonald's, probably, unless you had a real bad experience with McDonald's. Why? Because the name McDonald's is a funnel of information. You're making all sorts of assumptions about the quality behind it, but just based on the brand. You're making assumption. It's an information shortcut. You don't know anything about Joe's Burger. And so when you're out there in Oman dealing with that level of sophistication, do they really need information shortcuts? I mean, I think that's one way to look at it. Is it, Jim?
Yeah, that's the answer I think you're getting at. BP is the calling card. BP is the sign of quality. BP is the sign if you know what you're getting. If you deal with BP, we worked last time, we worked with your neighbors, this worked out. In this kind of B2B, somebody pegged that exactly. In this kind of B2B, we can just rely on BP. I don't need a brand for my seismic sources. I don't need a brand for my microphones. I don't need a brand for my algorithms for analyzing data. All of that, we think, just gets collectively represented as we're BP, this is our expertise. So in this case, with not the consumer-facing, buying gasoline, buying motor oil, buying your Apple computer, whatever it is you're buying, we find on this one, we just rely on the corporate brand itself as the symbol of all those things that brand stands for.
You're relying on the corporate brand, certainly to an extent, but these people aren't going to go with you. I mean,
right.
Just by virtue of the brand.
Exactly.
I mean, they know that there's a lot of technology behind it. They know, they do their homework.
Right.
And it's based on the homework that they make a decision.
Exactly right. They've read our technical reports. They've read our annual reports. They've talked to people who have done business with us. They knew who BP is. And if our logo is flashier than the Shell logo or things like that, that's not going to carry the day. It is the business reputation. Yes.
Hi, okay. So if the brand like BP is like the reputation that you're looking to hold with your daily customers, why then are there no BPs like, I guess, on the West Coast? And you
Yes.
guys are, and you're not branded with Arco?
Right.
Not the same colors?
Awesome questions. So the branding technique here, when BP, a little bit of history, all relevant. When BP wanted to start doing business in the US, they came over as BP and started earning market share in certain markets and winning over market share. Then to leapfrog that effort, merged with Amoco. So BP Amoco merged. The BP brand was determined to have more brand awareness, more brand equity, more customer loyalty. So we drew the Amoco brand in and went to BP. Then neither of those were on the West Coast. So you can go establish a presence or you can go pick up a presence. You know what, let's go pick up the presence. And in there, you know, Arco's got a great presence. Now that then brings to the next question. All of these customers go to Arco for whatever reason they go to Arco. Are you going to win more customers by bringing in the BP brand, or is the disruption going to set you back? And in that case, they decided, you know what, that Arco brand's working for us. Let's leave it in place. Let's continue to exploit this market through the Arco brand, and let's not go through the disruption. We think we'd risk losing customers and re-educating the public why BP's a good brand. So that's maybe some of the reasons why you see companies. Exxon and Mobil merged. I can still go to an Exxon station. I can go to a Mobil station. They decided both of those brands had so much customer loyalty that it was worth running each of them in parallel like that. So excellent question. I'm going to come back to the question about IP during crisis mode. Two quick points on that. One was, it won't surprise you that there was a lot of negative press during the worst moments of this oil spill. People using the BP brand and disparaging it and splattering oil on it and doing things like that. Now, you could come out and say, maybe I have a copyright case, maybe I have a trademark case on those, or you could come out and say, people have a First Amendment right, people have a right to be mad, and letting people vent at this point is maybe constructive. Our decision was, let's let them vent. We didn't file a single suit against anybody exercising their right to criticize a company over our brand or copyright. Where we drew a line is if somebody was deceiving the public. People were putting up fake Facebook sites and purporting to talk on behalf of us. Well, that's not venting, that's deceiving people. Would shut that down. People put up fake Facebook sites of the CEO. Again, that's deceiving people, that's not venting. So in those cases, we did use our brands and copyrights. Our call was let people vent. That's healthier than going in and trying to shut this down. Because you know what, if I were the protester, I'd just love to put on my website, and then BP sent me a cease and desist letter. Screw you guys. You know, you almost feed right into their trap on that. So you know what, let them vent. That's kind of what we did. Flip side of that, our engineers were working furiously to come up with ways to try to stop this. And we were developing a certain capping technology and getting fabricating companies to build it. Another oil company salesman started bugging the engineers. Hey, if you build that thing, that's my patent. We better start talking about a license. You owe me some money. Let's go. And starting to really disrupt the effectiveness in speed. I sent my counterpart at that company, listen, we're going to make this right. We do honor people's patents. This is an emergency. Can you tell your guy to stop bothering the engineers, let them stop the spill, and between you and me, I commit to you that BP will make this right. And he sent me an email the next day that says, we hereby grant you a royalty-free license to use this in this situation. Thank you. Which gets back to, do we patent safety technology? Here was a company that had some relevant technology and thought, you know what, let's just, for the greater good, let's just go get this thing shut in. So there are times to enforce patents and there are times not to, and that was one of the cases there.
There was, Jim, and I'm going to go off on a little bit of a tangent. Somebody in one of your takeaways was asking me what would lead Elon Musk to basically say, look, I'm giving away the IP to, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but basically I think we're all familiar with Elon Musk basically saying, look, the IP on my cars is for everybody to use. And I'm exaggerating, that's not quite exactly what he said, but what would, giving it away? Yeah. Why give it away? Yep.
Strength on the market share of electronic cars.
I'm sorry?
Strengthen the market share of electronic cars.
Why not? Well, why not keep others out?
Because it will make because with electronic cars you need a hybrid grid for it to work.
Yes.
So like we have a certain amount of cars.
That's exactly right. Can you repeat it? You need to keep your voice up.
So there's certain. So basically, if you wanna have electric cars work, you need to build a grid for it where everyone can tag, etc. And so basically, the reason why Elon Musk gave it away was that it makes it easier for startups to maybe get into the same sphere or other companies to copy.
Yeah. The more cars you have, the more electric cars you have, electric car makers out there, the more you have, the more capital you really have to build the infrastructure that you need to support the cars. So Elon Musk doesn't want Tesla building supercharge stations for every gas station out there. Okay? And so he benefits, his company benefits by having a far more robust infrastructure. But to get the robust infrastructure, you need more players in the market. Anyway,
No, excellent. And there are countless times where you feel in a mature industry, you and your competitors are competing for a pie, and you each want a bigger slice of that pie. here's a case where let's go make a bigger pie, and then we'll keep fighting over the size of the slice. So absolutely great analogy there. So I think I'm going to move on from this one. I would like to hit our biofuels model. But these were absolutely the right considerations. There are different ways to slice this. Some of these are a close call. Some of these are an easier call. But I think these were the great questions to ask and a great approach onto these factors on this business model. Happy to take maybe one more question to tie this one up, but otherwise I'd love to get to our biofuels model. Anything else pressing on this one? All right. That slide was merely the answer, and we've hit the answer to the extent there's an answer. Let's talk about biofuels here a little bit. Very simply, with biofuels, you're taking some kind of crop, corn, sugarcane, specially genetically engineered energy grasses. You're taking this and you're going to throw it into a fermenter. You're running a still, you're making beer, you're making vodka, you're making moonshine, but whatever you're taking these energy sugar sources, these carbon sources, and you're going to ferment them into an alcohol. And then further down, you're going to have to separate out the alcohol from the other components by distilling these out. And then coming out of the back end is ethanol, butanol, some type of fuel that perhaps can go directly into a car or perhaps gets blended and put into a car. But you're going from crops to making alcohol to separating the alcohol. That's at a high level how you're making your biofuels. Where do you try to distinguish yourself? Well, can you get good crops and farm them efficiently and get them to the front door of the factory? Where can you distinguish yourself? Anytime you're running a factory, can you run it more efficiently, more effective, higher yields, higher margins? Particular to biofuels, that fermenting, you're going to take these things and you've got microorganisms that are digesting the crop and very bluntly are excreting alcohol. And these organisms can be genetically modified and optimized to do that better so that they get better yields, so that they live longer, so that they work faster, so that they work in a broader range of incoming crops, but a lot of work on getting the microorganisms to be more effective for you. And then further down the line, some technology on the extraction, the distillation. So you've got this mess coming through that's some of the dead organisms, and it's some yeast, and it's some uneaten sugar, and it's some crop mess, and it's your ethanol or your butanol, and you want to get the good stuff out and then recycle this back out. So now you're all experts on biotechnology. Let's run through that process and see what we might want to do with intellectual property. A little bit more about the business model here. These are high volume operations that you want to run fairly effectively. But you know what, coming out the back end, it's just ethanol. It's just butanol. There's nothing special about the thing coming out the back end. And now you're going to sell it out there against any other producer who made it by any other way, whether renewable or not. Market segments. There are some pressures now to minimize impact on the food market. You know, if you're using corn as the input, you're perhaps putting pressure on food chains. If you're using sugarcane, perhaps you're putting impacts on food chains. Perhaps people think, yeah, go ahead and put impact on the sugar. Maybe we've got too much sugar, but you're looking at those things. So you're segmenting the incoming stuff. One of the things BP has been looking at, can you take the cellulosic waste, take your corn, take the cob out, throw the stalks and the husks, throw those in the input, and let the corn cobs get out into the food chains. So back to the optimizing the bug, can you optimize your microorganisms to work with those types of inputs that won't impact your food stock? Can you throw city trash into this and come out with ethanol at the back end? Can you throw wood waste from whoever is turning logs into 2x4s or plywood? There's sawdust, there's scraps, there's unused wood. That has carbon content in it. Maybe you can throw wood scraps into the front end of this, optimizing your bugs and taking the stuff out the back end. So those might be some market segmentation or some input segmentation you want to look at. Let's look at the strengths we bring to the table as we're doing this at BP. We have some really smart bioengineers that are working on optimizing those bugs, optimizing the yeasts, optimizing the nutrition package that you throw in here. For a while, one of our best technologists was the founder of Sam Adams Microbrewery, not micro anymore, but you know the Sam Adams Beer Brewery? He was one of our biotechnology experts. It turns out if you know how to make beer, you know how to make biofuels. That was an eye-opener for me. Here's another thing to know. These technologists out on our West Coast plant, every year they have a beer brewing competition. So again, these are very transportable skills. Technology strengths, we think we have real good biotechnologies to optimize that fermentation, to optimize those bugs. I talked about the expertise we bring at refineries. Refineries are huge, complex manufacturing plants where crude oil comes in, gas, diesel, jet fuel comes out, and you're just working for 1% more efficiency, 1% more margin, 1% less waste, 1% less leakage. You're really fine-tuning that. So we bring process technology to bear, process expertise, some transportable skills into a biofuels organization. And then I think the last thing that we'd like to say that we bring to this is distribution. It's one thing to be able to make the ethanol or the butanol. It's another thing to have thousands of gas stations, thousands of fuel blending stations, places where we can take this butanol, this ethanol, put it into the gas stream, get it out to the market. So that's, although doesn't make you at making biofuel, once you've got the biofuel, can you exploit it very well? So we would say that's a skill set we bring to the table. Crop management. There are people better than BP who know how to grow corn and grass and sugar and all of those things. The other thing I learned on these is when you optimize where does your plant go, step one, find out where the crops can be grown efficiently. Step two, put your plant right in the middle of it. If you have to truck corn for hundreds of miles, you've already lost money. You're not going to be able to make biofuels efficiently if you have to transport your crops. So when the crops come in the front door, you want them very local, so you're going to optimize the location of these things. And then we'll talk about brand opportunities as well here. So let's talk about a business model here as we looked through these segments, and perhaps I telegraphed some answers, but we've got to get crops in the front door. If you were creating this business model, how would you optimize a technology and IP strategy for just the slice on getting the products in the front door, whether it's the corn, the sugar, the corn husks, whatever? What do you think about that one? Did you bring anything special to the table on getting that crop in the front door? Maybe the machines. Maybe if we've got some expertise on handling it in. Yep, there's an opportunity there. Do you want to run the farms? Again, I think I foreshadowed that. Everybody's shaking their head good. We don't want to run the farms. How about genetically modifying those crops? If you've got some real smart biotechnologists, do you think you might have some ability to optimize a crop even if you ask somebody else to farm it? Some opportunities there? We talked about today struggling with patent law on digital technology. 20 years ago, it was struggling with biotechnology. Would you try to get a strong, so let's leave farming alone in the interest of time. No, we've got no interest in running farms. Just buy the stuff. Your biotechnology, whether it's in genetically modifying the crops or genetically modifying the bugs that you're using to turn this into alcohol. Bunch of smart PhD biochemists learning out how to genetically modify bugs. IP opportunities here?
Yes? No?
Patent, trade secret, leave it alone, don't worry about it? What do we
Who
think?
votes patents? Who votes trade secrets? Okay. Why trade secret, Jack?
I think you're in biofuels for the long haul. Patents expire for 20 years. It'd be best to keep this as a trade secret so that you have the long-term benefit of your technology.
Bless you.
Other thoughts?
I think the counter to that could be that the genetic modification of those organisms So having a patent that then allows you to license this out could be beneficial.
Other thoughts? Yeah.
Is that an abstract idea?
What's that?
Or it's
The-
building upon a natural phenomenon?
All right. One of my favorite law, Supreme Court question, do Chakrabarti, or is that too old? Is that just me and you these days?
No, I think we may have touched on Chakrabarti a little while back, but go ahead.
Anything under the sun made by man, we'll come back to that, is patentable. So if you're modifying a gene, if you're modifying an organism, I don't know what time it is, like 7:50? If you're modifying an organism, those are patentable. So yes, you can absolutely patent the genetic engineering. And we're running out of time. We do. We decide to patent there rather than the trade secret. It is a long business model, but we see technology here evolving quickly. It's an emerging field. The technology is going to keep getting better. Is what we do today going to be relevant 20 years from now? We're betting will be several generations down the road. So on this one, we're going to go with patents on the biotech. And I do want to respect the time and not keep you late here. The other thing worth discussing here is looking at the business model. High capital intensive to go build a bunch of plants. Pros and cons, build a bunch of plants, run them yourself, license this technology out to other people. Thoughts on that? All right. Again, I'm going to cut to the chase on this one in interest of time. There is a huge established base of corn ethanol plants out there. We think a good model here is to bring our technology to them to license it for a percent of the output, for X percent per gallon or X cents per gallon. What we're doing is bringing this technology to the corn ethanol plants and say, if you convert to our bugs, our fermentation, our process optimization, we think you will have a more profitable business than with corn. So we think if you convert over to our technology, you'll make more money, and to pay for that, we will take a cut of your improvement. So we're trying to establish a licensing model there. Here, because there is such an established base where we think we can bring our technology in as a drop-in replacement. So we're going to do a big licensing model here to take advantage of an established base rather than build a bunch of plants, which is capital intensive, and we've got other places to spend capital. We've already been in litigation. We don't do a lot of litigation, somebody asked that. We had about a 6-year lawsuit fight, multiple patents in both directions, ended up settling. Cross-license, so we licensed out our patents to them. They licensed in their patents to us. We're both able to use each other's technology. We pay different royalties. We pay low royalties where we're good. They pay low royalties where they're good. We pay higher royalties if we get out of our field. But it was a way for both companies to coexist. Back to the bigger pie. We'd rather see biotechnology hit big. Let's let both companies out there try to exploit it. Let's grow the pie. And while we're out there, let's see if we can better slice of a pie. But we thought this was not a case where you fight to the better end and try to get them out. And I've run a little over. I apologize.
No.
Do you want to wrap this up? One last question, or if anybody wants to hang, I hate to keep you here.
Well, I'm thinking about a
too late.
great brand opportunity for BP. BP beer. Quench your thirst and your cars.
I'm gonna write
So
that down.
You can buy a bottle of beer, and you can either drink it or put it in your
You
fuel
could be
tank.
out at the BP pump and running in and getting the BP beer while the gas is going in from the BP pump. Thank you very much.
Jim,
I really
thank
appreciate
you.
the time.